is 2 p.m. on a Monday and I am still in my pajamas, but we're here, okay? And that's all that matters. Hello my sweet angels, it's your girl Jay, and today I am here with my January wrap up for 2025. I read a total of 13 books this month, so without further ado, let us get started. The first book that I have is Everything We Never Said by Sloane Harlow, and I gave this book a 4 out of 5 stars. This follows Ella, who is filled with guilt after the death of her best friend Haley because she was the one driving the car when they got into the accident. Ella returns to school only to start a very complicated relationship with Haley's boyfriend, Sawyer. Then Ella discovers Haley's old journals and she discovers some very dark secrets. This book was rather predictable, but I had a lot of fun reading it. The book starts off very slowly, but as the story progresses, it does pick up pace a little bit as the tension starts happening. This is told from a dual point of view between Sawyer and Ella, and it also has a few of Haley's journal entries sprinkled throughout. I do think that the journal entries really help to build the suspense and tension throughout the story, and I think that those were probably my favorite parts. I think that the toxic relationships portrayed in this book were really well done, and I really like the message behind Haley's character and the importance of choosing the relationships that you get into. Overall, I really enjoyed this. I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. The next book I read was The Close-Up. This is by Pip Drysdale, and this is another one that I gave 4 out of 5 stars. This one follows an author named Zoe Ann Wise, and she moves to LA in the hopes of fulfilling her dream of becoming a famous writer. Things seem to be going pretty well for Zoe, but then she gets ghosted by a bartender named Zach, who has turned into a pretty famous actor, and then her debut novel tanks in the charts. As Zach's stardom rises, Zoe starts working in a flower shop, desperately trying to think of a new idea for her next book. When she unexpectedly runs into Zach 3 years later, they rekindle their romance and her writing block seemingly vanishes. Then the paparazzi posts the picture of Zach and Zoe online, which causes a stalker to emerge who begins to reenact the plot of Zoe's first book, which has a very tragic ending. The concept of this book was so intriguing to me, and I was thoroughly invested in finding out what happened to Zoe next. I actually listened to this one on audiobook, and I think that the narrator did an incredible job with really showing how scared Zoe was in some of the scenes. I thought that the story was a lot of fun. Although I do think that the writing became a little bit repetitive, I think that it would make an incredible TV show or movie. This was definitely a slow burn, but it did pick up pace as the story progressed. It definitely ended in a way that I had not seen coming, and I don't really know how I feel about the epilogue. All I can say is that it was very unfair in my opinion. But I will admit it was quite shocking. I think I will definitely be checking out more of this author's writing in the future because, like I said, I had a really fun time with it. I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. Next up, I read Together We Burn. This is by Isabel Ibanez, and I gave this one a 3.5 out of 5 stars. This one follows 18-year-old Zarella. Her mother was a famous flamenco dancer before her death, and her father is a dragonor. They own their own dragon fighting arena, but on the night of their 500th anniversary show, tragedy strikes, leaving her father wounded, her dragons slain, and many spectators injured. The family is now being punished by the Dragon Guild, and they may lose their arena unless they can prove that they were not to blame. Zarella must team up with a dragon hunter named Arturo to save her arena and keep her family afloat. I actually thought that this was a pretty unique story featuring dragons in a new way. It was very similar to bullfighting, which I thought was a lot of fun. I really liked Zarella. I think that she was very strong-willed. I also really liked Arturo and how grumpy he was. I do wish that we had gotten a dual point of view between Zarella and Arturo. I think that that would have really helped the reader see more of his hesitation and ultimate attraction towards Zarella. I do think that the enemies to lovers was well done, but I do think that it became a little bit repetitive with Zarella's constant inner monologue about how annoying she found it that she was noticing how attractive he was. I also really liked the underlying mystery about who was behind the attacks, and I honestly was quite surprised about who it ended up being. I gave it a 3.5 out of 5 stars. Next up, I read Heist Royale by Kayvon Lewis, and this one I gave a 3.5 out of 5 stars. It is the second book in the Thieves' Gambit duology. This picks up 6 months after where the original heist of the first book took place. I do think that this was a fun sequel, but it was pretty much the exact same thing as the first book, and I did enjoy the first book more. It is very fast-paced. It does have you rooting for the characters to pull off the heist, and I did really like these characters, and I think that a lot of them went through a lot of development by the end of the story. I think that this definitely delved deeper into the relationships that started in the first book, and I did really like the new dynamics that formed with the teams. I also really liked how there wasn't too much of a focus on the romance between Ross and Devoir in this one until the end of the book. There's also a secondary romance that started in this book that definitely had me giggling and kicking my feet. I will say that I don't think the sequel was necessarily needed, but I am not mad that it happened. I do think that it wrapped things up nicely from the cliffhanger that we got in the first book, so I give it a 3.5 out of 5 stars. Next up, I read The Bitter End by Alexa Dawn, and I give this one a 3.5 stars. This one takes place during a winter storm that traps 8 high schoolers in a remote ski cabin for their senior excursion. When one of them dies under suspicious circumstances, they quickly realize that they are actually trapped with a killer, and they are picking them off one by one. This was a lot of fun. It's told in multiple perspectives and dual timelines from the past and the present. The chapters from the past really allowed the reader to understand the backstory and how these characters were connected, as well as the secrets that they were all hiding from one another. I will say that none of these characters are particularly likable, but they were pretty interesting to read about. It was fun trying to piece together who the killer was because everybody was a little suspicious at some point in the story. But overall, I don't think that it was anything particularly memorable. I had fun while reading it, but I don't think I will ever go back to it, so I give it a 3.5 out of 5 stars. Next up, I read Night Strider by Sophia Slade. This was my favorite book of this month, and I am obsessed with it. I gave it a 5 out of 5 stars. This follows Ren, who is a living nightmare known as Night Strider. She was created from a dream in the Wake. She has manifested in the Riviera, and she now serves Para Warwick, who is an all-powerful king of both worlds. It also follows Queen Isla, who is a weaver, and this means that she can walk between both worlds. She is on the run after rescuing the Dreambreaker, which is a child who may be the key to the rebellion. The child is stolen before she can get her to safety, and Queen Isla will stop at nothing in order to get her back. In the Wake, Queen Isla is arranged to marry Prince Cain, who is Warwick's son, and she has to decide whether or not she can trust him in aiding her in this rescue, and it's like the story of that. Sophia is and probably will always be one of my favorite authors. I think she is just so incredibly talented. She wrote my favorite trilogy for the longest time. It's called Vinyl. I used to talk about it on my channel all the time, but she finally has a traditionally published book, which is this one, and I have to say it is the best thing that she has ever written, in my opinion. This is extremely fast-paced. Right from the very first chapter, you are instantly sucked into this world and need to know everything about it. The world building in this is incredible, and the complex magic system is so interesting. You are told bits and pieces about this world as the story progresses, which really helps not to overwhelm you with an info dump. There are 2 separate worlds in this, the Wake, which is where humans reside, and then the Riviera, which is where the dream beings are. There is an amazing cast of characters that instantly make you fall in love with them, and the way Sophia writes, I know that something bad is going to happen to these characters, and I so desperately want her to just leave my babies alone. The banter between characters is so well done. They had me laughing out loud on multiple occasions. I think that the slow burn romances were also incredible, and I am rooting for them so hard. I am definitely intrigued to see how the dynamics change in the second book that is releasing later this year. This is told in multiple point of views, which really helps the reader understand who these characters actually are. I honestly feel so deeply connected to every single one of these characters, and if Sophia touches them, I'm going to be devastated. Sophia is honestly the queen of plot twists, and I know that the next book is going to be a wild ride, so I cannot wait until it comes out. I give this a 5 out of 5 stars. This is probably my new favorite book of all time. The next 2 books are actually part of the same series, but they are companion novels, which I did not know, so I was very confused when I went into the second book. But the first book is Tithe, and the second book is Valiant. These are both by Holly Black. They are kind of like the OG fairy books from back in the day, but unfortunately I gave both of these 2 out of 5 stars. I just was not a fan of them. The first one follows 16-year-old Kay, who moves back in with her grandmother after her mother is attacked with a knife at one of her rock shows. She reunites with her imaginary friends, and she discovers that there is actually a fae world that needs her help to release or free the fairies of the Unseelie Court, and it's kind of the story of that. I just found that the first half of this book dragged so much, so when the action actually started happening, I didn't particularly care about it. I also thought that Kay was just very unlikable, which made it a little bit hard to root for her. The saving grace for me was Reuben. He is a knight of the Unseelie Court, and he was kind of the only reason why I continued reading. Can't say I enjoyed their romance, but I did like him as a character. But I pretty much picked up the second book right away, and again, 2 out of 5 stars. Like I said, I thought this was a continuation of the series, but it actually follows a completely different person. So this one follows 17-year-old Valerie, who runs away from home in New York after she discovers a very devastating secret that her mother has been hiding from her. She ends up joining a gang of squatters, and she discovers that there is a world full of magic and mysterious creatures, and she dabbles in that. There is a very brief mention of Reuben in this, but other than that, it is a completely different story. I personally don't think that there was enough fairies in this. I think that there was too much of a focus on the human world for my liking. I did like the mystery behind trying to figure out who was poisoning the fae, but other than that, this book didn't really hold my attention, so 2 out of 5. Next up, I read Experience by Kate Young. I gave this one a 3.5 out of 5 stars. This one follows Bet, who just turned 30, and she recently realized that she likes women. She quickly met and fell in love with her girlfriend May, and she thinks everything is going pretty well, but then she is blindsided when May suggests that they take a break before getting more serious with one another. Reluctantly, Bet agrees, and she starts a journey of casual sex until the break is over. This was a really fun read. I think that Bet was a pretty great character. You couldn't help but root for her as the story went on. It features some great female friendships and some pretty amazing side characters as well. Ash was such a supportive friend towards Bet, and I really liked how they brought Ruth into their little group. I also loved Ruth so much. She was so much fun to read about, and I really loved how her and Bet grew closer as Bet was stumbling through her relationships. I do think that the ending was a little bit rushed, but I did enjoy it nonetheless. I gave it a 3.5 out of 5 stars. Next up, I read Glitter. This is by April Lynn Pike, and this was actually a reread for me. The first time I read it, I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars, but this time around, I gave it a 4.5 out of 5 stars. This follows the people of Versailles, who live as if they were in the court of the 18th century with the added bonus of advanced technology. 17-year-old Danny witnesses a brutal crime committed by the king, and so Danny's mother arranges a marriage between the king and Danny in exchange for their silence. Danny fears for her life, so she wants nothing to do with the scheme. She has 6 months to provide the funds to an outside source who will be able to help her escape. With the help of an unexpected companion, Danny decides to turn to drug dealing, a new product called Glitter, in order to gain the funds. I think that this was so much better the second time around because I was really able to focus on the world building of the story, since I kind of had a feel of who these characters already are. I am and forever will be a sucker for the forbidden love trope, so I ate this up. I remember the first time reading it, I wasn't the biggest fan of the romance, but honestly this time around I actually really liked it. I will say that Saber was not my favorite, and the first time I read it, I really liked him. So that was an interesting new development in my taste. But by the end of the story, I was rooting for them together. I have picked up the second book in the series, which is called Shatter, and so far I'm really liking it. I hope that it is as good as this one, but I will report back hopefully in February when it is done. Next up, I read The Bletchley Riddle. This is by Ruta Sepeti and Steve Shakin, and I did not particularly love this. I gave it a 3 out of 5 stars. This is set on the cusp of World War II in Bletchley Park. Jacob and his younger sister Lizzie become a part of a code-breaking operation. Their mother went missing in Poland and she is presumed dead, but Lizzie is convinced that she is still alive and she will stop at nothing until she discovers the truth. I honestly should have known that I wouldn't love this. I am not the biggest fan of historical fiction and I really should stop reading them because I am particularly not a fan of historical fiction set during war. I don't really know how to explain it, but I was expecting more from this. I think because it was Ruta Sepeti and she is one of the best historical fiction writers that I have read from. This is told in dual dual point of view between the siblings. I really liked Lizzie as a character, but I found Jacob's chapters a little bit boring and I didn't really care what he was up to. But I did really like their sibling dynamic, and I liked how the mystery of where their mother was woven throughout the story. And I do think that the story did a great job of sprinkling the history aspect throughout in a fun way. I do think that the code breaking was interesting, but it did feel a little bit repetitive by the end. I ended up giving this a 3 out of 5 stars. Next up, I read The Business Trip by Jessie Garcia, and I gave this one a 4.5 out of 5 stars. This one follows two women who meet on an airplane. Stephanie is going to a business trip, while Jasmine is trying to escape an abusive boyfriend. Days later, they both send text messages to their friends saying that they've met a man named Trent McCarthy. Suddenly, the text messages stop and the two women are declared missing. I honestly loved this so much. I thought it was such a fun thriller. It had so many twists and turns that kept me on the edge of my seat the entire time I was reading. I thought I had it figured out, but I did end up being wrong in the end, which I love. I listened to this on audiobook. It is a full cast audio, and I definitely recommend that format of reading this book because it was so much fun. There are a lot of characters to keep track of, and you do get multiple point of views in this, but I do think that all of the characters were utilized well. A lot of them are very unlikable, but I kind of love to hate them. But I was a big fan of Robert, who is Stephanie's neighbor and cat sitter. He was just such a delight. I will say that I did not expect the ending and how it played out, but I was so pleased with how the story unfolded. The ending line also packed quite the punch. This is another author that I will definitely be checking out more of their writing. I really liked this. I gave it a 4.5 out of 5 stars. And the last book that I read was Legend of the White Snake. This is by Sherry Lee, and I gave this one a 3.5 out of 5 stars. This follows Prince Zen, which when he was younger, his mother was bitten by a white snake, which caused her to become very ill. The only known cures for her illness are a spirit pearl or an antidote that is crafted from the white snake itself. The prince is determined to find the cure, and he will travel great distances to obtain it. 7 years ago, Zhen, a white snake, ate a spirit pearl, which allowed him to turn into a human. When the prince and Zen meet unexpectedly, they are instantly drawn towards one another, and it's kind of the story of that. This started off pretty strong for me, but as the story progressed, I felt that it became quite rushed, and I really do wish that it had been fleshed out a little bit more. This is told through dual point of view between the white snake and the prince. I liked both of the characters. I thought that their romance was very sweet. It was definitely insta-love, so if that's not your thing, I would probably avoid this, because when I say insta-love, I really do mean insta-love. But they did grow on me by the end of the story. The story flies by. It was a very quick read. I am not 100% sure how I feel about the ending, which is why I lowered my rating to 3.5. I think that I just wanted more, but I do know that it is a retelling of a legend, so that's probably how the legend ends, but I just wasn't like 100% satisfied with it. But I still enjoyed it nonetheless. I give it a 3.5 out of 5 stars. Alright everybody, so those were the 13 books that I read for the month of January 2025. Let me know down below if you have read any of these books and what you thought of them, and I will see you all in my next video. Goodbye!